Hamas is one of the most consequential and controversial movements in modern Middle Eastern politics. Its full name is the Islamic Resistance Movement, and it is a Sunni Islamist Palestinian nationalist organization with both a political structure and a military wing, the al-Qassam Brigades. To supporters, Hamas presents itself as a resistance movement against Israeli occupation and a defender of Palestinian rights. To Israel, the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Japan, and several other governments, Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization because of attacks on civilians, suicide bombings, rocket fire, and the October 7 attacks that triggered the latest major war. Understanding Hamas requires holding several realities together. It is a political actor, an armed movement, a governing authority in Gaza for many years, and a central force in a long-running conflict shaped by occupation, nationalism, religion, blockade, diplomacy, and war. Hamas was founded in 1987, shortly after the outbreak of the First Intifada, a mass Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Its founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, was a Palestinian Islamic scholar who had spent years building religious and social institutions. The movement grew out of Mujama al-Islamiyya, an Islamic charity created in 1973 and linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. Before Hamas became known primarily for armed struggle, this network was involved in mosques, education, welfare, and community organizing. These institutions mattered because they gave Hamas roots in daily life, especially among Palestinians who were frustrated with poverty, occupation, and the perceived failures of existing political leadership. The First Intifada transformed that social and religious network into a more explicitly political and militant organization. One of the complicated early dynamics was Israel's relationship to Islamist Palestinian groups before Hamas became a major armed opponent. In the years before Hamas's rise, Israel viewed religious organizations linked to the Muslim Brotherhood as a counterweight to the secular Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. The PLO was then the main Palestinian national movement and was pushing for political recognition and statehood. According to many historical accounts, Israeli authorities tolerated or even discreetly supported some Islamist social networks because they weakened the PLO's monopoly on Palestinian politics. This does not mean Israel created Hamas in a simple sense, but it does show how short-term political calculations can produce long-term consequences. A movement initially seen as a rival to secular nationalism later became one of Israel's most persistent enemies. Hamas's ideology combines Palestinian nationalism with Islamism. Its original 1988 charter described the struggle over Palestine in religious terms and called for a state across all of former mandatory Palestine, territory that includes today's Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. That charter was widely criticized as anti-Semitic because of language targeting Jews as a group. Over time, Hamas's public political documents shifted. In 2017, it released a new charter that accepted the idea of a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, meaning Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, but still did not recognize Israel. The 2017 document removed the earlier anti-Semitic language and said Hamas's struggle was against Zionism, not Jews. Analysts remain divided on whether this represented a real policy change, a tactical adjustment, or both. For many years, Palestinian politics was dominated by Fatah, the leading faction in the PLO and later the Palestinian Authority. Hamas challenged that dominance by presenting itself as cleaner, more disciplined, and more committed to resistance. In the 2006 Palestinian legislative election, Hamas won a majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council. Its campaign emphasized opposition to corruption and argued that armed resistance remained necessary to confront Israeli occupation. The result shocked many international observers. It also created a crisis. A movement many Western governments considered terrorist had now won a democratic election in the Palestinian territories. Instead of producing a stable power-sharing arrangement, the election intensified rivalry between Hamas and Fatah, deepened Palestinian political division, and set the stage for a dramatic split in governance. In 2007, tensions between Hamas and Fatah erupted into open conflict in Gaza. During what became known as the Battle of Gaza, Hamas forcibly seized control of the Gaza Strip from Fatah. From that point onward, Palestinian governance was divided. Hamas controlled Gaza, while the Palestinian Authority, dominated by Fatah, retained limited self-rule in parts of the West Bank. This split was not only administrative, it reshaped Palestinian politics and diplomacy. Gaza and the West Bank began to operate under separate authorities, with different security forces, political agendas, and relationships with outside powers. For Palestinians, the division weakened the possibility of a unified national strategy. For Israel and international actors, it complicated any attempt to negotiate a single political settlement. After Hamas took control of Gaza, Israel significantly intensified restrictions on movement and imposed a comprehensive blockade, while Egypt also restricted Gaza's border access. Israel has argued that the blockade is necessary to prevent Hamas from importing weapons and building military capacity. Critics argue that the blockade has collectively punished Gaza's civilian population and contributed to severe humanitarian hardship. Gaza is a small, densely populated coastal territory with limited access to trade, travel, and resources. Under Hamas rule and blockade conditions, daily life became shaped by unemployment, electricity shortages, damaged infrastructure, and repeated war. Hamas has also faced criticism from human rights groups and political opponents for repression, abuses, and restrictions inside Gaza. The result is a population caught between armed rule, blockade, and recurring conflict. Hamas and Israel have fought repeated wars and military escalations. Major rounds of conflict occurred in 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021, and again beginning in 2023 after the October 7th attacks. Hamas has used suicide bombings in earlier periods, rocket fire against Israeli cities, tunnel networks, raids, and other forms of asymmetric warfare. Israel has responded with airstrikes, ground operations, targeted killings, arrests, and military campaigns aimed at degrading Hamas's capabilities. Each round has had devastating consequences, especially for civilians. Israelis have faced rocket attacks, trauma, displacement, and killings. Palestinians in Gaza have endured large-scale destruction, high casualties, displacement, and worsening humanitarian conditions. The military balance is deeply unequal, but the conflict has remained persistent because neither side has achieved a decisive political resolution. The October 7th attacks marked one of the most significant turning points in Hamas's history and in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hamas-led fighters attacked communities and military sites in southern Israel, killing civilians and soldiers and taking hostages. The attacks were widely condemned by governments around the world and intensified the argument that Hamas should be treated primarily as a terrorist organization. Israel launched a major war in Gaza with the stated goal of dismantling Hamas and recovering hostages. The war produced enormous destruction and a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, while also deepening Israeli grief, anger, and insecurity. The episode showed how Hamas's armed strategy can create massive regional and global consequences, but also how unresolved occupation, blockade, and political stagnation continue to feed cycles of violence. Internationally, Hamas has navigated a complex network of relationships. It has historically sought ties with Egypt, Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Turkey, though these relationships have shifted with regional politics, especially after the Arab Spring. Iran has been a major source of support for Hamas's military capacity, while Qatar has played roles involving financial assistance and diplomacy. Egypt has been both a gatekeeper and a mediator because it controls Gaza's southern border and has hosted ceasefire talks. Turkey has offered political backing at different moments, while Syria's relationship with Hamas was damaged by the Syrian civil war. Hamas's foreign policy is pragmatic as well as ideological. It seeks money, weapons, legitimacy, mediation channels, and political survival in a region where alliances change quickly. One major debate is whether Hamas can be part of a political settlement. Over the years, Hamas has at times offered long-term truces based on the 1967 borders, with proposed timeframes ranging from a decade to much longer. Some analysts interpret these offers as evidence that Hamas could accept a two-state reality, at least temporarily. Others argue that Hamas has never fully abandoned the goal of replacing Israel with a Palestinian state across all of former mandatory Palestine. The distinction matters because diplomacy depends not only on what a movement says it might accept, but also on whether it recognizes the other side's legitimacy and can enforce agreements. Hamas's refusal to recognize Israel, its armed wing, and its attacks on civilians remain major barriers to international acceptance. By 2026, according to the source article, Hamas announced the resignation of its civilian administration under a Gaza peace plan, and U.S. President Donald Trump said his Board of Peace had reached an agreement to disarm Hamas. Whether such a process can succeed depends on difficult questions: who governs Gaza, who provides security, who rebuilds destroyed infrastructure, what happens to Hamas's fighters, and whether Palestinians gain a credible political horizon. Hamas's story is not only about one organization. It is about the failure of competing strategies: armed struggle, blockade, occupation management, divided Palestinian leadership, and incomplete diplomacy. Any lasting resolution would have to address Israeli security, Palestinian self-determination, accountability for attacks on civilians, humanitarian recovery, and a political future beyond endless cycles of war. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.